At universities across the state this week, groups honored liberal historian Howard Zinn. At Purdue University alone, more than 100 people attended a read-in. The school's president, Mitch Daniels, sent emails while he was governor trying to censor the use of Zinn's work in classrooms. As Sarah Whitmire reports, those emails are what sparked this week's events.
Our president, Mitch Daniels, while he was governor of Indiana, had tried to censor the work of Howard Zinn.
We're just here in solidarity because we feel like it's power in numbers.
The group that gathered Tuesday night wanted to send a message to Purdue President Mitch Daniels and to political leaders that teachers deserve academic freedom.
Of course, I want to thank Mitch. Mitch, are you?
Daniels was not at Tuesday's read-in, but a spokesperson issued a statement that said, all viewpoints are welcome on our campus. But Daniels doesn't just consider Zinn's liberal teaching of U.S. history a viewpoint. He calls it misinformation. In emails the Associated Press released this summer, Daniels wrote after learning of Howard Zinn's death, this, quote, terrible anti-American academic has finally passed away. He called Zinn's book, The People's History of the United States, a truly execrable, anti-factual piece of disinformation that misstates American history on every page. In those emails, Daniels sought assurances from his staff that Zinn's history wasn't being used in Indiana classrooms.
The fact that he called it unfactual, or that it wasn't fact, is just completely wrong, because all these things that he mentions in the book really did happen. It's just the perspective that's different. The fact that it's coming from the bottom up rather than from the top down.
There's no disputing Zinn's approach is radical. He even described himself as such. He tells the history of the U.S. through people's viewpoints he says were often ignored, such as slaves and Native Americans.
And they have always used two methods.
Alex Lichtenstein teaches modern U.S. history at IU Bloomington. He encouraged his students to come to Purdue to the read-in. His class is beginning a lesson on anti-war and the civil rights movement, so he says it naturally fit into the schedule.
The entire purpose of the book is to demonstrate that there are many voices in American history, and so to ban it or suppress it or to suggest that these voices should be silenced for young people is completely at odds with Zinn's work and Zinn's ideas and Zinn's purpose in life, and as Zinn himself would have said, completely at odds with American democracy.
In a lot of other countries, you've got the government controlling what people can say. And so academic freedom is just another way of looking at freedom of speech.
Peter Kloosterman is a member of the American Association of University Professors, a group that works to protect academic freedom.
We've known for a long time that freedom of speech is always under attack. Freedom of speech gives people who aren't in power the opportunity to say what they think. And so what we see here is somebody who's got a lot of power trying to take that away from people who have less power.
At the college and university level, a lot of decisions depend on the university administration, and the state doesn't have any authority. But Kloosterman says months after the emails were printed, the reason people are still talking about Daniels and attending read-ins is because people in power are trying to get more involved in making decisions about what should be studied in Indiana's classrooms.
There are people who think that elected officials or people in charge of universities are there because they know more and they should be making more decisions.
The head of the National Association of Scholars, which is a network of academics in higher education, wrote an op-ed not long after the Daniels emails were released. He said Daniels was right writing what he did. He said sometimes it's important for politicians to get involved to decide what's appropriate material in a public classroom.
There's been a lot of officials, government officials, the president of Purdue University being one of them, that supports the privatization of schools, and that means the privatization of knowledge. So then my question is, who chooses what we are exposed to? Who chooses what our children are exposed to?
And Sarah Whitmire, who reported on that story, is back with us to join us with more. I want to go back to that last question that you left us with. So who is responsible for what children are learning in the classrooms?
Well, at the university level, a lot of discretion is left up to the faculty members, but with that comes a lot of responsibility. Peter Kloosterman, who was in that piece, he said, the faculty have an obligation to present the best research that they know is available on a subject, and if the accuracy of something they use is called into question, they have an obligation to present that in the classroom and let the classroom discuss it and debate it.
Mm-hmm. What about K through 12?
K through 12 is different, and I think when we were talking about Zinn and the Daniels emails, the two have gotten lumped together quite a bit. And Daniel says he was never talking about what's taught at a university level, and he supports academic freedom. But in K through 12 classrooms, he says the state does have a right to talk about the curriculum and set the curriculum. The state sets the standards for K through 12 classrooms, and he says he stands by his decision that Zinn should not be taught in K through 12 classrooms. But for the most part, district administrators decide what's taught, and they work with the faculty, with the teachers to do that. But for the most part, they're the ones who are in charge on the day-to-day level.
Now, we talked with Anthony Arno this week. He's the co-editor of the Zinn publication, and by default, he said the state is largely making the decision about what children are learning because they're placing so many restrictions on teachers, and we have more from him. Let's look at that right now.
I think teachers need to have the freedom to make those kinds of choices, and as they're pressured more and more to just teach to a test and teach to a core curriculum, unfortunately, they have less control over what's going on in their classroom. And so it's harder to bring in those outside voices like Howard's, and I think that's a real shame. I think students will be far richer for being able to engage with Howard's work.
I think it's worth noting that Arno, who worked with Zinn, wasn't even advocating that Zinn's book be the only one taught. He says it should be one of many, and there are many ways to interpret history.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah.
Thanks.